My name is Thea Fowler. I'm 38 years old and I'm an architect. The kind they call when a building is worth saving. 10 months after my grandmother died, my mom cornered me in the penthouse grandma left me, slid a stack of legal papers across the kitchen island, and said, "Sign it, or I'll drag this out for years." She smirked while she said it. She had waited her whole life for that smirk, and she wanted to watch me break under it. I didn't argue. I signed every page, picked up my bag, and walked out of the home I loved most in this world. She thought my signature was her victory. But here's what none of them knew. I had read every page of what she was taking. She never did. And the very next morning, her own attorney was screaming at her so loud my brother could hear it through a closed door. What happened between that signature and that scream is why I'm telling you this story. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people finally get loud in their own way. We tell stories about families, betrayal, and the moment someone stops carrying what was never theirs to carry. If that sounds like a story you need today, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Let me rewind to the beginning because none of this makes sense without the version of me who existed before that September. I run a small preservation studio in Chicago. 4 employees, old buildings, honest work. I spent my 20s learning why 100-year-old structures stay standing and my 30s convincing developers not to gut them. In my family, though, my job title was different. I was the one you call Heater dies in Naperville. Call Thea. Grant can't untangle his taxes. Thea has a spreadsheet. Mom needs the porch railing fixed before her charity brunch. Thea owns a truck. I told myself that was closeness. It took me a long time to see the shape of it. That in my family, love ran like a service contract, and I was the service. My grandmother Margot was the exception. She never called me to fix anything. She called me to build things with her, which sounds like the same thing and is the opposite. Then came the phone call on a Tuesday in September. My mother's voice, flat and strangely formal, telling me Grandma had died in her sleep at 89. Peacefully in the bedroom, she designed herself under the skylight we argued about for a month, and got exactly right. I pulled my truck over on Doman Avenue, and sat there with my hazards on for a long time. I kept waiting for grief to feel like the movies. Instead, it felt like a load-bearing wall coming out of my own chest. Here's the detail I can't forget from the funeral, though. Everyone in that chapel was crying or pretending to. My mother stood in the front row, dry-eyed and straight-backed, and I watched her lips moving faintly through the eulogy. She wasn't praying. She was doing math. You need to see this house the way I do because to my mother, it was only ever a number. In 1974, my grandmother bought the raw top floor of the Holloway Piano Works, an old factory downtown, back when that block was somewhere tax refused to idle. She was 38 years old, the age I am now, recently widowed, and everyone told her she'd lost her mind. She paid almost nothing for it because it was almost nothing. Bare brick, pigeons, a frayed elevator from 1911 that groaned like a church organ. For decades, she camped in one corner of it and learned the building the way you learn a language. Then, years ago, she called me. I was 29 when we started and 35 when we finished, and we rebuilt that penthouse together with our 4 hands and a rotating cast of very patient tradesmen. A glass-house conservatory on the roof, angled so the winter sun lands on the kitchen island at breakfast. A custom hydronic heating system that runs quiet as breathing. The freight elevator restored bolt by bolt because she refused to let anyone rip out the building's spine. She knew every valve by feel well into her 80s. One night up in the glass house with tea, she tapped the deed folder on the shelf and said the thing I want engraved somewhere. A house doesn't belong to the name on the deed. It belongs to the hands that keep it alive. I thought she was being poetic. She was being literal, and she was being a prophet. But I wouldn't understand that for years. By the time she died, appraisers put the place at $5.5 million, and exactly one person left alive knew how to run it. 2 weeks after the funeral, we gathered in the office of Dana Whitfield, the estate attorney Grandma had hired on her own years earlier. Dana is 45, wears grey-like armor, and reads legal documents the way surgeons read X-rays. The will was short and clean. The penthouse and its contents went to me. The liquid estate, about $380,000, was split between my mother, Lorraine, and my brother, Grant. There was also a letter, and Dana read one line of it aloud because Grandma had asked her to. The house goes to Thea, and she knows which piece matters. I remember thinking that was a strange sentence, even for Margot. I filed it away. I had no idea I would spend the better part of a year turning it over like a key that fit no lock I'd found yet. Across the table, my mother's face did something I'd seen only once before at my father's funeral when the flag went to his brother instead of her. It went white, then perfectly smooth, like plaster being troweled. She folded her hands and smiled at Dana. "Well," she said, "Mother always did love a project." Grant stared at the carpet and said nothing, which I would learn was his position on everything to come. In the parking lot, Mom hugged me, told me we'd all get through this together, and complimented my coat. 9 days later, a thick envelope arrived at my apartment in Wicker Park. The return address was a law firm I'd never heard of, Bennier and Associates. I stood in my kitchen reading it with the door still open and my keys still in my hand. My mother was challenging my grandmother's will, and she was accusing me. To be fair to my mother, you should know what 63 years had trained her to expect. Lorraine was Margot's only daughter, raised in an era and a family where a woman's life was a ladder you climbed by waiting. She wore the right dresses. She married the right man. She chaired the hospital gala in Naperville for 11 straight years and kept a house so clean it looked uninhabited. She did every single thing that world asked of her, and she did it beautifully. And her reward was supposed to arrive on schedule. Her mother's estate, her mother's chair, her mother's rank. In my mother's world, things flowed downhill by seniority, mothers above daughters, owners above helpers. She had waited 6 decades for gravity to pay out. Understand? She never wanted to live in the penthouse. Concrete floors and exposed brick offended her. She called it the warehouse for years, right up until the appraisal came in, at which point it became our family home. What she wanted was the number, and more than the number, the order the number represented. Margot dying was supposed to be the moment the crown passed down the line. Instead, her mother had reached right over her head and handed everything to the help's favorite, to the daughter of hers who showed up in work boots. I genuinely believe that in her mind, she wasn't stealing anything from me. She was correcting a clerical error in the universe. That's what made her dangerous. People who think they are thieves get nervous. People who think they are restoring order will burn the courthouse down and call it housekeeping. The letter from her lawyer used a phrase I had to read twice standing in my kitchen. Undue influence. She was claiming I had manipulated a dying old woman. Here's the bitter joke about being accused of manipulating my grandmother. I was the one who'd guarded against exactly that. 2 years before she died, when Margot told me she was updating her will, I saw the red flag from a mile out. An old woman, a valuable property, a family with expectations. So, I did everything right, and I mean everything. I insisted she get an independent capacity evaluation from a geriatric physician, which she passed while doing the crossword. I insisted she use her own attorney, Dana, whom I had never met before that year. I refused to be in the building the day she signed. There are records for all of it. I brought the whole file to Dana's office and spread it out like a winning hand. And Dana looked at it and said the sentence that reordered my year. "This is excellent, and it changes very little for now. I will contest," she explained, doesn't need to be strong to be devastating. It needs only to be filed. The moment my mother's petition hit the Cook County docket, probate froze. The house couldn't transfer to me. The estate would sit in limbo while lawyers exchanged paper, and estates in limbo still eat. Property taxes, building charges, insurance, utilities on a $5.5 million penthouse, roughly $14,000 a month, paid out of the estate's shrinking cash while we fought. Time wasn't neutral. Time was her weapon, and it was legal. I sat in my truck outside Dana's office and felt the first illusion of my life come loose. The one where my mother loved me, somewhere underneath it all in a room we just hadn't found yet. Then I called my brother because I needed one person in the family on my side. He didn't pick up. My brother Grant is 35, sells software, and has twin 4-year-olds who think their Aunt Thea built every bridge in Chicago. He's not a bad man. I want that on the record because what he did next was worse than villain in a way. It was arithmetic. Grant and his wife Paige had been renting a 2-bedroom with the twins for years, saving for a down payment that kept receding like a horizon. And my mother, who has never once in her life missed the location of a pressure point, took him to lunch. I heard about it later from Paige in fragments she probably shouldn't have shared. When the penthouse sells, honey, I'm taking care of you and the kids first. That was the offer, not a bribe. My mother would faint at the word. Just a mother helping. All Grant had to do was nothing. Stay neutral, decline to corroborate that Grandma was sharp as a tack until the end, which he knew better than almost anyone, because she beat him at gin rummy the week she died and made him pay up. So, my calls started going to voicemail. My texts got answers a day late, short and careful, like postcards from a hostage. He didn't stab me. He just held her coat. At Christmas, I finally got one real message out of him, and I've kept it. She says she just wants what's fair, Thea. I read that in my truck outside a job site, engine running, and I laughed in a way that scared me a little. Fair? There it was, the family word for it. My grandmother had used her last free act on earth to say thank you to the hands that kept her alive, and the family had a correction to file. The contest was formally filed in October, and with it came the version of me my mother was distributing to the world. Relatives I hadn't heard from since my wedding that didn't happen suddenly called. Voices soft and probing the way you talk to someone you've been warned about. My Aunt Carol asked how I was holding up under all this, which meant she'd read Mom's summary. A cousin in Ohio wanted me to know she wasn't taking sides, which meant she had. My mother's church added the family to the prayer list for healing. The email said, from those who would divide us. I was those somewhere in Naperville over coffee cake. I was becoming a cautionary tale. The ambitious granddaughter, who got herself written into a confused old woman's will. Nobody called Margot confused while she was alive. You wouldn't have dared. She did the Sunday crossword in pen, and negotiated her own contractor bids at 88. But dead women can be revised. And my mother is a gifted editor. I didn't fight the story. My profession trained that instinct out of me years ago. When you find rot in a beam, you don't stand in the basement arguing with the rot. You document it. You photograph it. You write the report. And you let the structure tell the truth about itself in time. So, I kept my head down, kept paying my own way, and kept every record. Then, in early November, a thick envelope showed up in the estate's mailbox, addressed to the owner of the penthouse unit. It was from the building's board of managers. I was the only person in the family who bothered to read it, and by the second page, I had to sit down on the loading dock. The Halloway is a landmarked building, and landmarked buildings in Chicago live under rules with teeth. The city had flagged the facade for its mandated restoration cycle. The board had voted the project through and the special assessment was now official. Each unit owed its share by square footage. The Penthouse share came to $312,000, first installment due within the year. That was page 1. Page 2 reminded the unit owner of something I already knew by heart, because I helped write it. In 2021, Grandma had donated a preservation easement on the glass house and the original facade elements to a historic trust, a binding promise recorded against the deed forever that whoever owns the penthouse will maintain those elements to museum standard, submit to inspections, and fix what the trust says needs fixing on the trust's schedule, not the owner's. The trust's routine stewardship review was already on the calendar for spring. I sat on that loading dock doing the math my mother should have been doing at the funeral. The house wasn't a $5.5 million jackpot. It was a living thing with a payroll. Assessments, easement obligations, insurance riders, and systems so custom that the manuals existed mostly in 2 heads, one of which was buried in September. None of this frightened me. It was my trade, and honestly it was my joy. Keeping that building alive was the closest thing I had to church. But it put the whole war in a colder light. My mother was spending everything she had to take a crown off my head. I was the only one who knew the crown was made of iron. And her next move was to make sure I couldn't even polish it while we fought. Litigation, it turns out, is mostly homework with occasional cruelty. Through the winter, my life became document requests, interrogatories, and scheduling calls where grown professionals fought about calendars. Dana walked me through the projected cost if we went all the way to trial, somewhere between $250,000 and $400,000, depending on how scorched my mother wanted the earth. The estate's cash, the money meant for Mom and Grant, the only inheritance they actually had coming, was meanwhile draining by $14,000 a month, just keeping the lights on and the taxes current. My mother was burning her own bequest to spite mine. When I pointed this out through the lawyers, the answer came back that Mrs. Fowler was confident the property's sale would make everyone whole. The sale, she'd already skipped to the end. I developed a ritual for every deposition, every settlement conference, every miserable fluorescent lit meeting. I brought a thick manila envelope sealed and set it on the table next to my water. Nobody ever asked what was in it. Not my mother, not her attorney, not once all those months. That envelope will matter later, so remember it. Dana noticed it the second time and raised an eyebrow. And I told her, it's the house on paper. She looked at me for a moment and decided not to ask more, which is one of the reasons I love Dana. In January, the depositions began. My mother arrived in pearls and a suit the color of good cream, kissed my cheek in front of the court reporter, and then spent 4 hours under oath describing me as a predator who had isolated her mother. There's a special kind of vertigo in hearing your love described fluently as a crime. During a break in her deposition in the hallway by the vending machines, my mother delivered the truest sentence of the entire war. She came and stood next to me, smelling like gardenias and victory, and studied me for a moment almost kindly. Then she patted my sleeve and said, "You are the help, Thea. The help doesn't inherit. No cameras, no court reporter, just for me." I gave her nothing back. My trade teaches you to stand still when scaffolding shakes. You don't add motion to a structure that's looking for an excuse to fall. I held her gaze until she smiled and clicked away down the hall, and I waited until I was alone in my truck before I let my hands shake. Here's what I want you to understand about that sentence, though. It wasn't cruelty, or not only, it was her cosmology, said plainly. That night, I lay awake seeing our whole history through her lens, and the vertigo got worse. Every pipe I'd sweated in that penthouse, every drawing, every dawn I'd spent balancing the hydronic loops with Grandma handing me coffee. In my mother's ledger, all of it was recorded as service. Duties rendered by the lower to the higher. You don't leave the estate to the plumber because she plumbed. The plumbing was owed. 6 years of my hands were owed. And the terrible thing, the thing I only saw at 3 in the morning, was that some part of me had always half believed it, too. Why else had I spent 38 years earning my place in that family like a subscription that lapses the minute you stop paying? My mother thought she'd stated a law of nature. What she'd actually done was hand me the exact sentence I would need to be free. While the lawyers fought about who owned the house, somebody still had to keep it alive. The court had appointed a neutral administrator for the estate, a tired man named Mr. Okafor with 11 other estates on his desk, and he approved a maintenance schedule because buildings don't observe legal holds. So twice a month before dawn I'd sign the log kept at the desk and make my rounds. People think a building is a thing. It isn't. It's a promise you keep every single week, or it stops being kept at all. I bled the hydronic loops before the deep cold came. I ran the freight elevator its full travel and listened for the note in the cables that means trouble. I checked the glass house gaskets with a flashlight in my teeth, the way Grandma taught me, her voice still hanging around up there among the glazing bars. She could tell the humidity by how the third stair creaked. She was 85 the last time she rebuilt a valve actuator with me, and her hands were steadier than the 26-year-old apprentice I'd brought along. Those mornings were the only hours of that whole winter when I felt like myself. Grief sat with me while I worked, but it was good company, the kind that hands you tools. On the last February visit, my flashlight caught a hairline split in the sealant on the south glazing bar. Small, early, the kind of thing you fix in an afternoon come spring, or watch become a 5-figure problem by fall. I wrote it in the log, dated it, and stood there a long moment. Somebody would have to fix that by June. I wondered who they all imagined that somebody was going to be. In March, my mother found a way to take even those warnings. Her attorney petitioned the administrator with a claim that I might be removing or altering estate property during my unsupervised visits. There wasn't a shred of evidence because it wasn't happening. But accusations like that don't need to succeed to work. Mr. Okafor, buried and cautious, did the bureaucratically safe thing. The locks were changed. My maintenance schedule was cut to the bare legal minimum. Once a month, supervised, daylight hours only. I stood in his office and kept my voice level while I explained what a custom hydronic system does when nobody walks the loops. What a landmarked glass house does when small splits winter over. He was sympathetic the way a man drowning in paperwork is sympathetic. His hands were tied. He said everyone's hands were always tied. That was the third thing the war took from me. The right to stand inside the one place on earth where I knew exactly who I was. Sipped me a coffee on my way out the last unsupervised morning. He's been on that desk since before Grandma finished the renovation, and he watched us carry that house back to life year by year. He looked left, looked right, and lowered his voice like a man reporting from occupied territory. They come, they take pictures, they leave. Nobody touches the machines, says Miss Fowler. Nobody even looks at them. I thanked him and drove back to Wicker Park with my toolbox riding shotgun like a dog that's been told the park is closed. A house like that doesn't punish neglect right away. It waits quiet, patient. The way held breath waits, and spring was coming with a stewardship inspection in it. The next crack in my remaining illusions came from Grant of all people in April. His conscience ran on a delay, but it did run. He called me from a parking garage, voice low, and told me our mother had spent Tuesday afternoon walking a luxury broker through the Penthouse while the estate was frozen, while she owned exactly none of it. She'd gotten in on the administrator's inventory day, introduced herself as the next owner, and toured the woman through my grandmother's home, discussing staging and comps. When the broker asked about the pending litigation, my mother had waved a hand and said, "My daughter is just a formality at this point." A formality. I stood on a job site with rebar around my ankles and let that word ring. It clarified everything honestly, and I'm grateful to it. She had no plan for the house, no curiosity about it. In her mind, it was already subdivided into numbers. List price, commission, proceeds, and a check that would finally make her the matriarch dispensing fortunes from the head of the table. She didn't want Grandma's house. She wanted Grandma's throne converted to cash. Grant, to his credit, sounded sick about it. To his debit, he ended the call the way he ended every call that year. Don't tell her I told you things are hard enough. I promised and I kept the promise, and I added it to the growing file of things my silence was subsidizing. Then I hung up and looked at the manila envelope on my passenger seat, and an idea that had been pacing the perimeter of my mind for weeks stopped pacing and sat down. If she wanted the house this badly without knowing what it was, maybe the problem wasn't her wanting. In May, the lawyers arranged a settlement conference, the kind everyone attends and no one expects to survive. Conference room, bad coffee, my mother in linen, the color of a wedding. Before the talking started, I did something I'd been planning for weeks. I lifted a 3-inch binder out of my bag and set it on the table with a thud that made Benya's legal pad jump, and I slid it across to my mother's side. I'd spent a month of nights building it. The house book, every system in that penthouse mapped and photographed. Maintenance schedules by week, month, and season. Valve numbers, boiler settings, the elevator's service log going back to its restoration. The easement in full with the trust's inspection standards translated from legalese into English. The facade assessment, the payment schedule, the contractor directory with the 3 firms in Illinois qualified to touch landmarked glazing. Page 1 was a letter from me. No lawyer language. Whoever ends up owning this house, this is what it needs. This is what it costs and this is who to call because the building shouldn't suffer for our war. Dana thought it was strategically insane. Handing the other side a full accounting of burdens mid-negotiation. Maybe. But I decided early that whatever happened, nobody would ever say the house failed because I kept secrets. My mother looked at the binder the way you'd look at a dead bird on your doorstep. Then she extended one manicured finger and pushed it back across the table unopened. It's a house, not a spaceship. Her attorney's eyes followed the binder all the way back to me, and stayed on it a beat longer than his clients did. I want to pause here because some of you know this exact feeling. If you've ever tried to hand someone the truth with both hands and watch them push it back across the table, you know precisely where I was standing. Stay with me because everything that happens from here is why some doors once they lock never open again. If you've ever been the one who kept a family running while they called it nothing, tell me in the comments. I read everyone. Now, the conference collapsed inside an hour. My mother repeated her favorite threat on her way out, and I drove home, with the house book on the seat beside me, already knowing I'd be setting it on that kitchen island again someday. Back up half a step, because I skipped the holidays, and the holidays matter. Thanksgiving had come 2 months into the lawsuit. I found out about dinner the way you find out about parties in 7th grade, from a photo. 22 people around my mother's extended table in Naperville. The good china out. Grant's twins in matching sweaters. A chair count that had clearly never included me. Aunt Carol emailed me the following week. Subject line, thinking of you. Body paragraph explaining that I should really consider dropping all this for Mom's sake, because she's not getting younger, and family is family, and surely no house is worth this. I read it twice and understood something about how these wars actually work. The family wasn't weighing evidence. Most of them will never read a single filing. They were lining up by rank the way the family had always lined up. And by that geometry, I was a daughter defying a mother. Full stop. Guilty by org chart. The truth had no seat at that table either. What got me through that particular week was small and almost silly. A card arrived at my apartment, my name in careful block letters from S at the front desk. A bakery gift card fell out and one sentence I